Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by VidCheck, and the topic of discussion here is the cloud reality, and hopefully with our panel of guests we'll have a fairly constructive discussion around some key topics and issues that the cloud and the kind of services that you can host in that environment offer. So I'll go through some introductions for each of our panelists, and then also dive straight into the topics where we're going to talk about the environment, how you get to that environment in terms of migration, what services lend themselves to migration and what don't. A roadmap, what kind of pitfalls there are in terms of defining your roadmap to get into any kind of sort of hosted environment, as well as taking into consideration the commercial implications, what fits commercially in terms of making this happen, and also over what kind of time span, looking at the longevity. And then at the end we'll field and discuss any questions that crop up during the session. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to type those questions in. My colleague Laura is fielding those, and she'll filter those out, and we'll crack on with those at the end of the session. So let's dive in, and I'll introduce our first panelist here, Dan Sievers, who's the Executive Director for Systems Engineering at Fox. And Dan has got quite a lot of hands-on experience in the industry. He's worked in broadcast for over 25 years, and currently at Fox he's working on the bridge between the traditional sort of broadcast technologies and cloud-based sort of software solutions. And previously Dan's worked with software engineering teams at Intel OnQ. He was a technology architect at Disney, ABC, and has also worked for a well-known systems integrator as well. Joining Dan on the panel, we've also got Brinton Miller. Brinton is the SVP of Technology, Strategy and Architecture at Discovery. And I think one of the things that I find interesting about Brinton's role is the fact that he's responsible for both traditional corporate IT as well as the media IT side of things. For so many years we heard about convergence of technology, and Brinton is a guy that's got the unenviable task of making that all happen. He's very much focused on cloud-based solutions and virtualized infrastructure and environments, and he oversees the company's global media engineering and IT development teams as well, and partnering with Discovery's digital leadership on all sort of strategy technology plans going forward. And along with Brinton, we've got Darren Long. Darren is the Director of Production Services at Sky. He's been with Sky for quite a few years. I think joined in 1989, where he first oversaw the design and implementation of the production Sky Studios, which was involved 8 production studios and over 70 post-production suites. Darren is responsible for Sky Production Services, which encompasses the production studios, post-production content services, account management and booking services, which is a fairly vast remit. The department encompasses a huge range of skill sets and technologies, from cameras, sound, lighting, media management, graphics, video and audio, post-production. I think just about one of the only thing that's not in there is catering. And also joining us, we've got Larry Kaplan. Larry, as many of you may know, is the founder and president of SDVI. Larry is an industry leader and a serial entrepreneur with an extensive track record of building businesses and innovative businesses at that. Larry founded SDVI in 2013. Prior to that, of course, he was the CEO of Harmonic and one of the co-founders of Omnion. going way back, and Larry, of course, is a very active member of SMPTE and an honorary member of the IABM as well. So there's the introductions, and of course there's me, the CEO, COO at VidCheck. Whoops, gave myself a bit quick promotion there. Sorry about that. So let's crack on with the topics, and I'm going to sort of start the topics discussion here with Dan Sievers, because Dan and I were talking just yesterday actually about matching the environment and applications and services which best fit these sort of hosted environments. But actually Dan raised a very valid point in the fact that before we even dive into this, we should really define what the cloud may look like. What does this environment really look like? And certainly based on Dan's Dan, your real life experience, in terms of deploying this, what is your view of that sort of landscape look like at the moment?
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. I mean, you talk about my experience, it's more like my heartache. The reality is it depends who your audience is. When you're speaking about the cloud, if you're talking to infrastructure people, they have one take on it. If you're talking to software people, they have another take on it. If you're talking to operations or production people, they sort of have more of a services take on it. So it depends, who your audience is and what you're trying to accomplish in the cloud, because it's a blend of technology and business practices. You need, the thing is, over the years that I've noticed, at least in some of the endeavors that I've been involved in, you have to be very careful with how you approach the subject of the cloud. Because a lot of people think it's software running on a VM. A lot of people think it's AWS or Azure. A lot of people think it's simply a SaaS product that I don't care what it runs on. So for us in the broadcast industry, it's kind of a strange area because we're used to appliance-based proprietary systems. And now that we started moving to the digital world, into the file-based world, moving files around and processing, doing transforms and whatever else we used to do in the baseband environment to files, it changed the nature of how we build our infrastructure, how we think about it in terms of long-term strategy of the decisions we make on CapEx, moving towards an OpEx model. So it's a weird subject to talk about. There's no straight answer to what the cloud is. It is what you need it to be. Which is kind of the way that I found is the best approach.
Good. And actually, just continuing that thread, Brinton, if I can just bring you in terms of picking up, one of the last things that Dan just said. What do you, from your perspective, what do you need the cloud to be?
So I think we look at the sort of cloud compute in a couple of different lights, as sort of just described, but I think the biggest place that we're looking at it is really around infrastructure as a service. So how do we stop buying things with blinky lights? How do we stop the spend on data center build-outs? Because at the end of the day, we make television really well, and we don't necessarily make data centers really well. We don't want to be in the business of managing data centers past a certain point. We want to focus on the creative. We want to focus on all these things that are about TV and less about the care and feeding of servers and storage and whatnot. So for us, we really look at this as an infrastructure play, and understanding how do you take what's traditionally on-premise, often proprietary, black box infrastructure, and move it and sort of bypass the whole virtualization craze. I mean, as an industry, we didn't embrace virtualization on-premise. We're starting to now, but now we're sort of faced with having to skip over sort of on-premise virtualization and go right to the various public cloud hypervisors out there, and how do I start architecting infrastructure? How do I re-architect software? Because that's the biggest piece to the puzzle in our mind. We don't want to take an application that, may have worked okay on an x86 server in my equipment center and just forklift move it to a public cloud. More often than not, we want to refactor the applications because we're looking for scale out. We're looking for all these great promises that cloud brings you around being able to burst beyond, sort of your traditional persistent infrastructure footprint. So for us, it's really about solving those volume problems while really addressing the shift in infrastructure.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. Darren, if I can just bring you in here, because one of the things that I'm mindful of is the fact that by and large, if you're moving HD files and thinking about a typical program master around sort of DPP, UK DPP type deliverables, you're looking at something in excess of 45 gig, a 45 gigabyte file, and does it make sense to kind of start moving stuff like that around in the cloud?
I think it's a really good point, and it's one which we constantly look at. And if you look at, if give you an example of what we do on a sort of monthly basis, we're putting on probably anything between 600 to 1,000 assets onto our service, and I'm talking about VOD assets. I'm not talking about linear assets. That's just VOD on its own. And when you're starting to deal with that, and when you're also then adding the linear services on top of that, and all of the on-demand services and set-top box on-demand services, it gets to be a very, very difficult decision to actually suddenly go over to a cloud service that obviously is going to need a huge amount of bandwidth and also the ability to push and pull content very quickly. And I think this is where we struggle with it. And I think one thing I want to define as well, I think there is a difference between a private and a public cloud. So in other words, we have looked many times at our own sort of private cloud and actually how we can control that, and obviously contain it in our own data centers, and obviously then there's a public view. But I think from a point of view of us pushing content out to our customers really quickly and processing that content, there are a number of things that actually they do make sense from a cloud point of view if you're looking at a long-term strategy around distribution, around content, around, let's say, Europe, and bearing in mind obviously now Sky is a European organization, so that does make sense to actually put content up for a short period of time onto a cloud that allows other parts of the organization to access, and again that would make an awful lot of sense. But when you're looking at actually your own internal need to process content and do any transcoding or encoding, anything you may need to do with that, then the proposition becomes a lot more difficult, and the scale is a lot more difficult as well from a point of view of what you need to do on a regular basis. So I think for us at the moment, if I'm honest with you, I don't think we've touched the surfaces of what cloud is really about. I think we're all playing at a different level, and I think if you're playing at a short term, I need to store something, I need to do something with it, then it makes sense. If you're looking at long-term storage or file content, that's sitting in a cloud services, that could get quite expensive. So I think the jury's out currently with us, and I think every time we walk towards it, well, then we find a reason why not to completely go over to a cloud-based environment. In saying that, I think it's going to come, and I think it's just at the moment I think we're not there yet, and we don't have the confidence of knowing that actually being able to turn on content really quickly and turn it off really quickly is what we're about as an organization. And actually I don't think at the moment some of the cloud services will give us that capability.
Excellent, thank you. Larry, you can probably help me get a little bit back on topic here, because we've kind of, like the cloud, kind of gone off and blown around in different directions because it is such a vast topic. But in your experience, because of what SDVI are doing, because you're kind of, you're gluing a lot of these fairly disparate components together and making this sort of, into a coherent service for folks. Do you see that there are particular services around, what Darren's just mentioned about, distribution and things like that and delivery? There are specific types of applications and services that lend themselves better to these environments?
Yes, certainly. Some do, some don't. and we could all come to a conclusion and make a list about which do and which don't today, and wait a week and it will change. I think the thing that I've come to how to approach this such a foggy area is to always keep in mind that the notion of business value. Listen to my customers, listen to people like Darren and Brinton, and the folks at Fox and Dan. What's the business value of doing things a different way? Generally speaking, you can make the high-level case that this virtualization cloud-based world will give us, the nirvana of infrastructure on demand, give us the ability to spin new services up very quickly, spin services down very quickly, capital efficiency, et cetera, all that. But on a case-by-case basis, as we go from where we are to this future, what's the business value of doing something a certain way? Because we all have examples of cloud-based things that make no sense whatsoever today. So I think our framework is okay. If I can do that, what's the return on that investment? Can I actually get the revenue faster? Can I switch that capex load to opex? And that should be the guidepost as we go forward.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so now we've kind of taken a broad brush approach and defined, what the landscape looks like to an extent. I want to go back to Dan and also to Brinton. I'll start with Dan. But in terms of the experience that you've had in making this work, how do you get from a traditional working broadcast infrastructure to something that's perhaps a hybrid, and then ultimately, to perhaps something that's hosted? And maybe let's not look at too far ahead of the future, but how did you get to the kind of solutions that you've got now?
Well, it's partly, I know that we're looking at our infrastructure first, usually, but normally what we do is, instead of going straight to the technology, sort of follow Larry's advice of looking at the business requirements first and having the technology match that, which is difficult to do because we're in our industry, especially with what we do in terms of engineering for broadcast and production, we're very tactical. To sit back and look at it on a strategic level, everything that we decide we want to do right now has to be in line with the long-term strategy. So there's some near-field stuff we have to do, some far-field. I think from a technical point of view, we end up leaning on our IT guys because we are migrating. I don't think we have a choice. We're going to end up migrating towards a data center type environment. At least that's what our place is starting to look like from that point of view. And the technologies that we're choosing right now in terms of hosting, the platforms that we're using for hosting all of our services, and that's kind of the tack we're taking, is instead of thinking about systems in terms of individual components, we're looking at the infrastructure as one big blended environment for both on-prem and off-prem, and we're changing the nature of how we do things. So for instance, one of the things that we're running towards is pushing all of our content in the cloud, a delivery from our content providers. So we're actually right now thinking about pushing everything to the cloud first and building our infrastructure around it using concepts as global object storage to enterprise-wide solutions to make sure that our files, our services are moved to our files instead of moving our giant files out to where the service is. So we're looking at using technologies like Docker to containerize services and take these tools that we have, which are generally smaller in form, and move them around closer to where the files are located and processing, and using resource management, dynamic resource management to do that. So it's a shift in thinking for us, where we normally take our tapes and run over to the tape machine. That's something we need to sort of think about throwing by the wayside. You know, we handle our files, we handle our tapes. We have to stop doing that. We have to start thinking sort of in the opposite direction, since the cloud, you know, technologies afford us new opportunities to sort of redefine how we do everything.
That's very interesting, because, you know, that's invariably, you know, one of the key things that leads innovation, isn't it? Is to look at a problem from a completely different angle. So, you know, I guess somebody needs to go away and create some kind of, you know, virtual tape machine type thing that you can deploy anywhere. Brinton, you know, is that in line with you know, with your thoughts, with your philosophies, and the way that you're kind of tackling these problems in respect of, you know, moving the services to the file as opposed to, you know, the traditional approach of moving files around?
To a certain extent. I mean, I think that we very much sort of entered our cloud initiatives for much of the same reasons. I mean, our very first project was also inbound content delivery from the 650 production companies that we work with around the globe. That's actually in public beta right now and will be in full production in April. And, you know, we're moving a massive amount of content. I mean, for context, last year Discovery took in 152 petabytes of content. So, you know, as much as you got to spend a lot of time figuring out the economics of a migration like this, you know, because of just that type of scale, you definitely get to a point pretty quickly where you just can't keep building to whatever the next ceiling is, you know. And that's our HD number. You know, imagine, you know, as our 4K numbers start ramping up, or as the world moves beyond to that, even to 8K and whatnot. You know, the industry landscape is going to keep making things, you know, bigger and badder, and that's going to continue to stress infrastructure. So we tend to look at projects around cloud as, you know, first and foremost, where do I have a need for scale and for or capacity that I just probably can't build on a sustainable basis on premise. But the other thing that we've been looking at a lot when we decide what projects to start as a cloud project is, where do we just have burning infrastructure? Where do I have, you know, hey, I've got a transcode farm over there that's, you know, the storage is old, the servers are old, you know, I need to move to all GPU, and, you know, instead of doing a complete hardware refresh, let's figure out the economics of, you know, moving to either our own sort of rehosting our software footprint in cloud, or moving to a SaaS model. You know, I think the commercial conversation is still big. You know, I don't think there's anything in our world that, you know, in Discovery's world, that we couldn't do in cloud today if we were willing to pay for it. Obviously, you know, with the budget manager's hat, I still have to pay attention to, you know, the bottom right-hand number. So, you know, a lot of our efforts right now are going out and talking to the public cloud vendors and taking them through, you know, sort of the realities of what we are as a business, because most of their quote-unquote media clients up until now have really been, you know, the Netflix of the world, the people who are doing, you know, business to consumer product offerings, you know, lower bitrate video, still very scalable, very complex operations, but that's been the model that the public cloud providers understand. So we've been spending a lot of time just working with the cloud vendors to help them understand what it is that we do, why it's different, why we need GPU tiers that may be above and beyond their current offerings, why we need disk access characteristics that look like X. And we've been making a lot of good progress with a lot of the bigger cloud providers, you know, to start delivering, first off, you know, just sort of the infrastructure offerings to support sort of modern sort of video processing infrastructure. But also there, I think, you know, we're starting to see the correction or the normalization from a commercial standpoint, where we're pretty bullish. We see, the commercial aspects working themselves out in the next year or so for most things that we do.
Okay, good. Darren, any of that sort of resonate with you in terms of, the research and the thinking that Sky has looked at?
Yeah, a lot of it resonates with me, and look, the one important thing is we want to embrace the cloud. There's no doubt about it, because if you look at our organisation, it's very similar, obviously, to Discovery as well, and they're certainly from a point of view of their reach a lot greater than us. But we've got to start embracing this, because quite rightly, there is no way that we can keep distributing content in the way that we have traditionally without actually using sort of short-term storage that allows us, or some form of processing that allows us to get that content out quickly. I think, for example, we definitely want to start looking. We can't continue to sort of just do all of our post-production, in our site. We're growing quicker than we could ever imagine, and obviously those type of things across, Italy, Germany, and the UK means that we need to share content, and we certainly need to edit in the cloud. So we need to store and then obviously give us the ability to do that. We also need to process in the cloud, and we are doing that in things like VR, where we're processing sort of a large amount of cameras in the cloud, where we need to spin up a lot of processing very, very quickly to be able to obviously turn those images into a 360-degree image. So those type of things are a very, very good convenience to us. But I think the key for me is actually, as somebody who's made, it's the economics of it. So we will look at obviously cloud, but we will always compare it against what we can do internally against what we can do in the cloud. And I think the other thing, along with obviously convenience and the cost side of it, is also the reliability. I hate to say it, but we're still in the world of not completely trusting some of the services. AWS is pretty good, but it has gone down. It has taken Netflix and Amazon down recently. And if you look at Azure Media and all those sort of things, they're not that reliable. So again, it's that confidence factor that we need to also build. It was a bit like when we moved from tape to file. Everyone thought the world was going to come to an end. It didn't. It's just building that confidence up and actually then applying the right processes to the right solution. And I think, look, it's something 100%. When I look internally at Sky, we have to embrace it. And we've been speaking with various people, including people like Larry, to actually look at how we as an organisation can get the most benefit out of obviously cloud services. And we are using cloud services. I think we're just not using them probably the way that we should be using them to actually obviously increase our ability and increase our scalability as we go on. But I think by the very nature of us becoming more and more sort of a bigger organization, we'll have to do it, and we'll need the services and the help of many companies out there to do it. So I think this is a little waiting game at the moment on some sort of cost models improving, and also some services that actually we'd really like to be available. And also probably the final one for me is really understanding where is your asset. I'm talking about, at the moment I want to know where it is, what it's doing in the processing, and how long will it take to get out the other side, because again this goes back to business critical deliveries as well. So I think those tools, not just the cloud services but the tools around it, become very important.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring Larry into this to help sort of provide some guidance about how potentially you kind of get to these environments. And we've skirted around some of these topics, Larry, so far. In terms of what's credible and what fits, and obviously as you said earlier on, it's got to add business value to what we're doing, and we've talked about the fact that distribution can drive this forward, but are there any you're doing this at the moment and you're offering guidance and insight to folks at the moment, and what's your advice in terms of trying to break this down from a sort of a practical point of view? If you've already assessed, right, well, we can save X number of dollars per month by putting this in the cloud, how do you get there?
My goodness, let's just say we're learning. and we benefit greatly from a very close relationship with the operations and engineering people at both Discovery and Fox, and I think we're learning together. We go into a project with some assumptions. We test those assumptions. We modify those assumptions, and it's an ongoing learning process. And I expect that's going to continue for some time. Not sure I'm answering your question.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe I'll bring Dan into this and ask Dan if you could kind of rewind time, if you had a time machine and you could go back to the point at which you started out in this journey, in rolling out some of these services. Is there anything fundamentally that you do very differently, with hindsight now?
Well, let's see. Hopefully my bosses aren't listening. But the reality is, yeah, it's the attitude of thinking of the cloud as a separate thing. The hybrid environment is and the infrastructure to maintain all of your services. Your services should be agnostic. This is the thing, right? We have AWS right now is sort of the leader out there, and they host a bunch of services that are unique to AWS that we use with them, like Lambda and their SNS and all the stuff that makes AWS AWS. But the reality is, from a software point of view, I would have and this is something that we're doing now, is to make sure that the software that runs on these platforms is agnostic to the platform, so that the infrastructure that we're building here on-prem, whatever that VM farm happens to be with the storage, and we're starting to look at sort of hyper-converged solutions right now with compute, storage, and a network, described as software. So we're which mimics sort of what we can get out of AWS, and it makes it easier to manage for the infrastructure teams. It gives a good level of abstraction for operations and the user. They don't have to worry about the hardware and the platform and everything that runs underneath it. So I think that would be the main thing that I would change, is just whatever solutions and that we come up with, whether it be a cloud-first startup or whether it be a old-school broadcast vendor that's trying to figure out how to take their big iron and move it to the cloud. I think the platform is really is the most critical part of the equation.
Right, Howard, could I ask a question, please? So it's Darren Long. Yeah. So this is really to Dan and to Brinton, really, because the one thing which, from a sort of a production environment, is do you feel, both of you, do you feel that obviously from a cloud base, that whenever you look at the cloud, you always think either it's a short-term fix or it could potentially become a long-term fix? In other words, is this something which you feel comfortable around actually just having a solution that is spinning up, solves a problem, gets out of the way and comes back to your new normal services? Or do you feel at this present time, and I'm not talking about in the future, I'm talking about at this present time, you are confident enough that actually the cloud is delivering you something that you could quite happily sit on forever?
I don't know. I guess I can take a stab at that. I don't really think of the cloud as an alternative. I think of it as part of my infrastructure. So the onus is really on us in order to support the operations. You should be agnostic to whatever action you initiate, you should be agnostic to where it's actually happening. It should just be seamless. And so whether you're editing or whether you're transcoding files or whatever you're doing, even on the broadcast level right now in the traditional playout level, we're looking at ways to do the same thing, where all of my infrastructure is elastic. I have a pool of resources from the infrastructure side, and I have a pool of resources from the services side. and to put the intelligence in there, the business intelligence, to decide what the best application, how to spin up those services and where, is kind of the direction we're going. We're not there yet.
No.
The technologies are starting to get there, but I think that's the direction that we're going.
I'm just intrigued because obviously what I've heard from a number of people is more around the fact that actually, like as you just said, production service, spinning something up, quite rightly, if I need some more production facilities, I spin it up, I create that ability, and then obviously then I can contract back down to the requirement I need, and obviously that makes business sense because that makes it a very efficient service. I think what I'm asking probably more around is that production systems per se, would you now feel currently, as we are today, that is a system that you could just live on and become a broadcaster that lives on, how can I say, a large amount of those type of services that run your services day in, day out?
So it's Brenton. I'm pretty comfortable that I'd say, yeah, we're there. The services that we've moved to cloud, like video processing services, video delivery services. Not that we don't still have, transcode and file delivery services hosted on premise, but the workloads that we've moved to cloud are in the cloud and will stay in the cloud, as and we don't expect to make any changes. We're sort of really looking at all of these as sort of it's just a platform change for us.
Yeah.
Once you've proven the technology works, to a certain extent, 7 years ago, Discovery used HP servers for our x86 compute for transcoders and everything else. A couple years ago, we moved to Cisco UCS servers. Now we happen to buy servers from Amazon and Microsoft in the form of cloud services. Yeah, the consumption model is different, but once we've proven that the horsepower is there and the performance is there to do the heavy operational loads that that media brings with it, we've been very comfortable moving things and with no intention of moving them back. Yes, it may scale up and down based on volume, and that is a benefit, and that allows me to no longer build for my ceiling. So it's an economical or an economic way to go about building out infrastructure. But we're pretty trusting in the infrastructure that we've deployed at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you.
Excellent, thanks, Darren. Okay, so let's move it on because obviously the commercial implications. We've covered some of these right now, but I think there's one question which sort of popped up from a conversation that I was having with somebody the other day, which is, we know that we've discussed that, obviously only doing this if it makes good, if it adds business value to what you're trying to do, if it makes commercial sense. But equally so, looking at this from a slightly different perspective, and actually I'll start this with you, Darren, if I may. In your conversations with other vendors, would you say that all vendors are providing the right sort of commercial models for this kind of stuff to work?
Actually, no. If I'm being really honest, I think where we always start is the capability of what they're offering. So, in other words, and I think where we've got to get to is always when we consider obviously cloud services, we do look at the financial model, and there's no doubt about it. There are times where we would be quite happy to apply a more of an OPEX than a CAPEX solution, bearing in mind that obviously cash sometimes is easier to come to than actually getting CAPEX, and that's something which we internally always look at, and certainly if you look at some of the ways that it's going with some of our, how can I say, software providers, that whole solution around obviously delivering, moving away from the shrink wrap and going to the license model has become a lot more appealing, and I think it's something now business are very comfortable with. But I do think that certainly when we get people come through the door. It's never the first thing that comes up. It's normally the last thing that we talk about, because it seems to be the one question which is no one's truly sure about, because it's always done on whether it's volume or whether it's done on sort of capacity that you're going to use, and it's one of those ones that you always awkwardly have to ask at the end of a conversation, which is, okay, this is great, looks brilliant, now what's the cost of it? So I think it seems to be the wrong way round for me, because I think sometimes the whole appealing part of it is that actually we can do some of this stuff, we can do most of it or all of it internally, but actually sometimes the business driver is like, we've got a solution, it has a really good cost model against it, and actually we can apply it.
Yeah, and we started off much earlier on in the conversation talking about business value, and if you're sat around the table coming to terms with that, then in many respects it doesn't really matter how good the technology is. Yeah,
but that's can I just, sorry, one last thing. That's
yeah.
The frustrating thing, I think, as an end user, is that actually some of the solutions that people are coming up with are amazing, and you think, wow, okay, that's just the sort of thing I want to do. But then when you lay over the sort of business economics of it, it's like, well, it'll get cheaper the more people go on it, and it's that chicken and egg scenario, and I kind of get that. But sometimes, yeah, it's trying to get companies to at least understand that, the thing that will really get it off and running is the economics and also the flexibility.
Yeah, no, that's I agree. Brinton, if I can bring you into this, I just wonder if you've had any fundamental issues from a commercial point of view in talking to other vendors to get, I know it's early days with your platform that you're rolling out, but are you still faced with these obstacles, certainly commercial obstacles from other vendors?
We do.
Okay.
At least as relates to sort of software license, taking public cloud costs and egress pricing and some of those challenges for a moment. As relates to sort of, am I buying persistent software license? Am I buying a SaaS product? Am I buying a license on a consumption model? We've struggled with some vendors. Other vendors have been able to come to the table instantly with a, hey, here's how we're thinking about this. What do you agree? Do you disagree? I think one of the positive things for us is as an early adopter, or as an early sort of bullish adopter, we've been able to steer a lot of those conversations, because often we were the first or second customer for a lot of our vendors who were pushing hard for cloud. I think we've also had a lot of vendors that have, in essence, decided that because the complexities around, or that what they perceive the complexities around the commercial model, were refactoring their app to be sort of scale out or microservices based, or sort of any of these sort of cloud sort of topologies. Some have opted to just say no, they're not interested. I think that's probably a bad plan if I was a vendor. I think that it's, for most of us, it's probably a conversation of when, not if. Our business is ready and the economics are ready. So for the vendors that have supported the move, we've been able to come to an economic model that worked for everybody pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, we still are buying a lot of persistent software license, even if we're hosting in cloud. More often than not, personally, Discovery is not. We do lots of SaaS on the corporate IT side. On the media side, we're not doing a lot of SaaS. We're doing some, and we've had a couple projects that are very successful with it. But a lot of our initial work have been either consumption-based license, where it's a Discovery managed platform as opposed to a SaaS offering, or rehosting of a persistent license.
Good, thank you. Dan, in your experience, have you got anything to add in the terms of the sort of commercial side of things that you've been involved with?
I think most of it's been said by the other panelists. The challenge is for us right now, and I'm not sure about the other, my brethren out there in the media world, but from what I've seen, we have a software engineering group. Everybody does, and I'm constantly faced with having to figure out, okay, from either from an economic standpoint or from a strategic financial or strategic, am I buying or am I building, right? And it's weird because I end up going right down the middle simply because there isn't a solution out there that I can change into what I need for my current requirements. So most software vendors, the new software vendors out there, they're already, they already have solutions that can scale. They already have solutions that aren't locked into a specific technology or a specific platform. But the traditional older broadcast vendors, they're for the most part they're having a difficult time that transition, and especially when it comes to integration between services. Because we're starting to work with companies, not to name names or anything, but on the enterprise level, like ServiceNow and other bigger other vendors out there that traditionally broadcasters wouldn't work with, and they are SaaS, they are scalable, they are cloud first, and they have a rich they have RESTful service web services that we can tie into, and then some of the other initiatives that we're doing, we're starting to realize we need to look more on the for BI and BA analytics, how to use that, and a lot of the software that and so long story short, what we're finding is that we're holding on to our older the whatever we have running right now, our automation systems, our some of the older platforms, we're holding on to them because we have nowhere to leap to. We're waiting for everybody to catch up in our industry to offer solutions that we can deploy at scale, and it's a real challenge, not to be able to integrate those older systems with the new environment. Oh, did I drop off?
No.
This is definitely silent.
This is definitely silent. So I'm going to ask the next question then. So Dan, another question from me is, so from the sound of it, it's not necessarily the first thing you think about then when you think of building new infrastructure, or is it?
Well, I'm sorry, what is the finance?
No, so from a cloud utilization point of view, when you're thinking about obviously technology to actually enable you to do something, it's never the first thing that leads.
No, it's a difficult decision, because the first decision is, are we going to do this in the first place? Is it financially viable? We look at our budgets. We're moving more towards an OpEx model, which has a large amount of change management internally, especially when like Fox, our operations group, we service clients, and that's not just a services transaction, but it's a financial one. A lot of the budgets are in our clients' hands, and when we go from things like static licenses for on-prem transcoding to using a cloud where we're OpEx, whereas before, our services and the finances, the budgets behind it were buried in our CapEx. Now it's being exposed as OpEx, so we have to have those conversations. So there's some business drivers, but when it comes to technology, we don't make huge leaps right away. We have to wait until our vendors catch up to what we need going forward. And I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I mean, the decision for us on a technology level is difficult, and we count more and more on our operations and business units to guide us, because I can stuff any technology I want in my plant or on the cloud, but it has to make sense for whoever's going to use it.
No, and it's one of the areas which actually, in some respects, you saying it is one of the dilemmas that we have here, which is if you're building an infrastructure for, let's call it your clients, your customers, whoever it may be, because that's what we are within the service part of the organization, it suddenly becomes a very hard model to always go back to them and say, by the way, you're going to be paying for this forever. Exactly. So, no, actually, it's a very good point you raised. Howard, are you back with us now?
Yeah, yep, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. Yeah, that's excellent. Let's. I want to bring Larry into the last topic of discussion, which we've touched on throughout. But Larry, you introduced me to the concept of land and expand in terms of going the distance with this. Do you want to kind of expand upon the land and expand terminology?
Yeah, sure. So in a way, to carry on from this notion of moving from CapEx to OpEx and speaking in behalf of the vendor community, the commercial aspects of this change are as daunting, if not more so, than the technology for a vendor. Think about a vendor whose basic financial framework is around the notion of CapEx. So that vendor ships a piece of hardware or sells a license. Once that transaction occurs, the value that's been sold to the customer is, there's a promise there, but no particular accountability, and the revenue is recognized. So now we're moving to a world where ultimately that hardware or license turns into a on-demand resource that the end user uses as needed, pays for as needed. That's a fundamentally different financial model, and that is just a huge challenge. A second challenge that in some ways is even more daunting, is that you take that idea of I'm selling something to a customer, I recognize the revenue, I promise value, am I accountable for that value? Indirectly, but not directly. I think we're moving to a world of what other industries call land and expand, and actually this comes out of the service industry of all places. And the notion of land and expand is that the vendor takes responsibility for the end user deriving value over the life of that service that's been provided. So it's not just, I bought this thing, I've been promised value, whether I realize it or not is my risk. It's actually the idea of there's an initial sale, if you will. The end user commits to, okay, I'll try this. And the vendor recognizes additional value, or from his perspective as a business, is to help that end user derive more value. The vendor takes responsibility for that value going forward. So it really kind of shifts the picture, and you don't hear this talked about very much, but think about the implications of that in terms of the relationship in the broadcast industry between the people that supply product and services versus the people that consume them. If your vendor, the three of you guys, if your vendor was literally financially responsible for the value that you receive from what you purchase from that vendor, that kind of changes things. So my point is that there's two very significant things happening on the vendor side of this that are very challenging, and in defense of us, if some of us are not as responsive as perhaps you guys would hope, this is tough. This is very tough.
Yeah, I think I'd go along with that. I'd echo that, and I still, when I look at our sort of pricing model for our AQC solutions, it's the traditional price list, the traditional price book kind of thing, and how that would go, and how you'd normally present that in front of a potential customer. That's being pulled in more than 3 different directions at the same time, and trying to get that to fit on a profit and loss spreadsheet is hard work. But as I'm sure most of you sat here now know that we're engaged with people like you to understand the requirements and change that model. It's the rate of change may not necessarily be as desirable as we would all like. I'm acutely aware of the time, the fact that we're rapidly running out of time here. I just wonder if just to kind of go around the table very briefly here, if you guys have any sort of closing comments. I'll start with Dan. Any sort of final thoughts, Dan?
I think that this is actually a very very good roundtable discussion that I've actually walked away with a greater appreciation of first of all, I feel like part of a club and not lonely out there trying to figure out how to get this cloud thing to work. But it's I think the industry is the broadcast industry and the vendors such as yourself, and especially working with Larry's group. There's an education that has to happen out there with vendors as well as with ourselves and our groups, because what the cloud is doing is it's forcing a conversation between groups internally and externally to us that we haven't had before. We have to make decisions on a collective measure more than we have in the past, where we could go off and the technology solutions were mostly out there and ready. It was just a question of which one we're going to choose. But now we have to stop and think about it, the impact to our business. So it's going to be an interesting to see what where this all goes.
Excellent, thank you. Brinton, any sort of closing thoughts?
I mean, in general, I think my big commentary would be that I think I'm, again, both personally and what we've already seen now at Discovery is that we're already doing way more in cloud than we thought we could have a year ago, 2 years ago. Hell, 2.5 years ago, I was firmly in the camp of we will never do anything in the cloud. The cloud just can't do media, and we've consistently proven ourselves wrong on that, and that's been great. As an industry, I think one of the big, there's two big pushes. Both sort of, one with our traditional vendor community, one with this new vendor community that we have in public cloud providers. With our legacy vendor community, I think the big push is, to one of the earlier questions, you can't. It's one of the first things we ask. You don't necessarily need to have a cloud offering right now or today, but tell me what your path to get there is. Because if I'm going to, start a long-term relationship with the vendor, and I know that this is a direction that I'm heading to, and at some level of scale, I need to, ensure that there's a path. And as an industry, if there's more of us banging on our vendors' doors asking for it, it'll get there a lot faster. Similarly on the public cloud space with those vendors, there's a lot of education that we need to do with those vendors so that they understand what our businesses are and why they're different than streaming video to websites sometimes, or why is post-production different than streaming video? Because right now we're lumped sort of in this M&E space, and that's driving the economic models for a lot of the public cloud vendors, and I think it can change, and I think public cloud vendors are willing to change. They just need to be educated on what models they need to support economically. So I think that's my spiel.
Yeah, thank you. Darren, I guess in many respects these are conversations that you're already having. This is a process that you're very much going through at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I want to highlight to everyone listening on this is that in no way do we think that actually the cloud isn't a solution for what we want to do. And I think we've just got to solve a few of the things which are causing us a few issues, but from a point of view of OPEX against CAPEX, there is a logic sometimes about whether we use it or we don't use it, but I do genuinely know that it's something we want to, it's something that we will, it's something we are at the moment. And obviously the one thing is actually to be a lot more confident in that in the future and actually have a lot more refinement, work with the vendors in actually obviously having a cost model that makes economic sense, but equally obviously look at other services that can bring us business benefit that in a much greater way, you know, very, very similar to sort of what Netflix and Amazon are currently doing as well. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for us. I think one of the things which was highlighted earlier was just the sort of, how can I say, the cost of ownership. And one of the things which I think we've got to get out of our own head, we know that depreciation happens on all the infrastructure that we put in place, but obviously from a point of view cost of ownership, and Larry was speaking about that, there is a very difficult conversation you have to have about, you know, a cost of ownership that you never really know is ever going to go up as you use it. So the more you get locked into cloud services, the more you're going to get locked into an ongoing OPEX model that obviously will have increases as you go along. Now, that happens in the real world, it happens with technology, but we just got to get over that a little bit, because I think there is sometimes a concern that the more we use, the more it will cost. The more it costs, it will start becoming uneconomical. So really, I think the last points I want to raise are we want to, and we will continue to use the cloud. We just need to get a lot more confident and obviously have a lot more financial sort of constraints around how we use it to make it have a real business benefit.
Excellent, thank you. And Larry, finally, any thoughts from you just to close up?
Well, it's exciting. It's exciting times. You know, I've been around in this industry more years than I will admit. It is by far the most exciting time in terms of a change in not only the underlying technology, but the business models around it, and it's very cool.
Excellent, thank you. So just to kind of finish up here, because we're pretty much out of time, if anybody has any of our audience have any further questions, please feel free to email us at sales@vidcheck.com. We'll also be at the HPA Tech Retreat next month, and then of course NAB is just around the corner, as if any of us didn't need reminding about NAB looming large. I'm just having a look at, there's a question come in, which let me see if I can field this one question just before we do close up. Do cloud scalability and commercial models create an environment that end customers are less likely to look at better product performance, greater optimization, etc., or is the opposite true, where well-designed and implemented cloud solutions better abstract away from being stuck with legacy vendors? So I guess what the question is, you know, are you better off sticking with, you know, purpose-built, you know, hardware software integration based on physical kind of tin, or is there, you know, is there a performance benefit from you know, migrating to the cloud? Let me just ask that, if I may, of Dan.
That's a difficult question to answer. You get different things from the cloud that you do from on-prem. Performance is something you always have control of in an on-prem solution. It really depends on the application, obviously, but one thing that on-prem doesn't give you is scale. And so if you can take a problem and parse it out, for instance, into microservices, and you know, you can use a parallel process instead of, you know, just you know, horsepower, you know, on-prem. I mean, those are your basic two choices. Is, you know, do you have to do a lot of stuff quickly in a parallel fashion? But what we're starting to see now with some partners like Amazon is they're coming out, you know, with sizes of their compute, and that are starting to make sense. You know, they've been talking about, you know, we talk to Amazon a lot. You know, they're coming out with some pretty powerful EC2 instances that'll, that we're starting to look at. You can get GPU as well. You can get what you need. They're very interested in providing the horsepower that we need to get what we need done. So I think we're on the verge. I think right now on-prem unfortunately gives you the most agility for performance, but we're going to see that change, I think, pretty soon.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you very much to Glenn for that question. I think we're out of time. It just remains for me to thank all of you on the panel for giving your time to discuss this. I hope it was productive for the audience as much as it was for those of us on the panel. I think it was very good. So yeah, once again, thank you very much indeed.